Hello, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. With us once again, Carl Denninger. He writes and trades for a living over at market-ticker.org. Carl Denninger, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, I wanted to get you back on because last year in 2012, when everybody was wondering how this would turn out, the Obamacare thing, you were already saying this is going to be a disaster for the economy. They really haven't tackled the real problem, is that nobody, will rein in the healthcare community. They can do whatever they want. First of all, let's start with this provision that, the employer mandate that they kind of slipped in on July 5th with a little blog post saying, oh, by the way, employers won't have to, have any health care for, companies that have 50 or more employees. We're going to put that off for a year. Does that fix the problem? And what are they trying to do with putting off this employer mandate?
No, it doesn't fix anything, Greg. And what we keep seeing is that as the Obama administration runs up against the economic reality of what they passed, they're now trying to find ways to dodge it because they can see the internals in the employment report just like everybody else. What's been happening is that employers have shifted to both part-time and contract workers. And so while you see, job numbers of 160,000, 175,000, the truth is that if you look at the internals of those reports, you have people that are working part-time for economic reasons, which means they would want a full-time job, but they can't find one. And so as this cost structure begins to become more apparent to businesses, they are doing the intelligent thing that any business will do. They're evading what costs they can and suffering those ones that they can't avoid. So now we have a problem here, and the Obama administration's reaction to this has been to unilaterally, and by the way, illegally, put off the imposition of this mandate. The executive does not have the right under the Constitution to rewrite laws that they got passed that they suddenly decide they don't like. So the idea that they can somehow turn around and say, oh, by the way, we're just kidding, you don't have to comply with this, that's false. If they don't like what they passed, then they need to go back to Congress and get it changed and have the president sign a bill that changes the law. But that's not what Obama's doing. And, of course, the problem he has in this regard is that if he goes back to Congress and says, oh, by the way, we want to change how this mandate works, then what the Republicans in the House are going to say is, oh, we'll change it for you. We'll just repeal the whole thing, which he'll veto. So there's the loggerhead problem here. So what he's doing is illegal in an attempt to get what he wants.
Well, Ben Bernanke was out last week, and one of the things that he brought up was that he talked about employment. They have this idea that if we get to 6.5%, that suddenly the economy is better. But then all of a sudden his words erase that. That might not be really a hard and fast line in the sand, basically is what he said. But here's what he did say, and Ira Harris, who's also a trader, brought this up to me, sent me an email. He said he picked it out in the question and answer period, and he said, the 7.6% unemployment rate, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is a direct quote, overstates the health of employment. It overstates the health of employment. And if you did unemployment the way Bureau of Labor Statistics did it back in 1994, and John Williams at Shadow Stats recreates that, you'd have a 23.4% unemployment, underemployment rate. To your point, unemployment is not getting better, and Obamacare is making it worse. Is that right?
Yes, I don't agree with what John Williams does and how he runs his statistics. I've got a lot of problems with his methodology. But what I look at is the employment participation ratio. In other words, the ratio of the people employed to people of working age in the population. Now, that's a number that if you use unadjusted figures, in other words, you don't try to seasonally adjust things. You just look at year-over-year rate of change, because that's the important thing. If it's June this year and June last year, there is no seasonal adjustment because both of the seasons are the same. It's June. Okay. If I look at the ratio from that perspective, the dive that occurred during the decline in 2008 and 2009 has not been retraced. And this is the important factor because that is what drives the overall common employment picture for you, I, and everybody else in the economy. We all want to look at, how many jobs were created and this and that and everything. But you have to adjust that for the people that are coming into or leaving the workforce in terms of where they are in their life cycle. not based on whether they can find jobs or not, because that's to some degree artificial. You ask someone, well, how easy is it to find a job? And if they say it's hard, you don't count them. Well, that's dishonest, all right? So what we have to look at is, as a percentage of the population as a whole, which is all the people that consume goods and services in the country, what percentage of them are working? That's a very easy numerical answer, and it's not subject to being fudged. And what we've seen is that there is always a slight uptick during the summer months from seasonal hiring that goes on into the summer. You know, all the kids get out of school, they go work at the water parks, right, and the amusement parks and everything else. And then those people get laid off in the fall. So there's a little bit of a sawtooth pattern to it. But it has essentially flatlined since 2008. And that's a problem, because we are now back to where we were in the 1970s before women went into the workforce en masse. And you cannot support a tax system and an economic system that demands that we be putting in 6, 7, 8% of GDP in manufactured money and government, and that's all driven by government deficit. Well, at the same time, you've got a workforce that is in fact shrinking as a percentage of the population. That doesn't work.
Less taxpayers.
Yeah, the bottom line is that the government can't fund itself if it doesn't have people working and paying taxes. That's the bottom line.
So you agree, Bernanke, that the unemployment rate we have now overstates the health of employment?
Yes, but what Bernanke is doing is saying that if I allow the government to supposedly pick up the slack, okay, by doing quantitative easing, that somehow this will stimulate the private economy to take the reins back from the government spending. This is the Keynesian view that the government should act countercyclically to balance out the economic health of the nation. The problem with the Keynesians is they only work one way. They want to stimulate the economy when things are poor. But when things are doing well, they don't want to refill the coffers, pay the debt down, and take the punch bowl away. Bernanke refused to do it during the 2000s. He refused to do what he was supposed to do from a regulatory perspective during that decade. And now he's doing the same thing again by saying, oh, well, we'll keep doing this until the economy improves. Well, we've been doing it for 5 years. The economy hasn't improved. So at what point do you look at this program and say, we are just pumping up asset prices, but we're not helping people to afford everyday living expenses, nor are we improving the common status of everyday Americans? Because if you don't do that, then the asset prices that you have today do not reflect value. And as that gulf grows larger and larger, you are building the exact set of conditions that led to 2008's crash.
A bubble.
Yeah. Another one.
A bigger one. Some people say
a bigger one.
You think it's going to be bigger? The bubble is bigger, therefore the explosion is going to be bigger in the economy.
The divergence between price and value today is greater than it was in 2007.
Wow.
The problem with it blowing up today is that the federal government and the Federal Reserve are out of ability to lower interest rates and produce yet more stimulus to try to offset it, because they never took the accommodation away, and Bernanke's saying he's not going to. So what you have now is an asset system that is wildly out of kilter with underlying value. And those cycles always happen in the natural course of an economy. People thought tulips were great investments in Holland. Right? They weren't. They were just flowers. But this is always how the economy works, because the fact that I have a belief in value that is false is the only reason you can sell me something in the first place. You as a merchant always must believe that what you have in your store is worth less than what it really is worth, because you have to have paid for it at that price. You have to be able to sell it for more than your perception of value, or you go out of business. I have to have the perception that the value is greater than what it really is, or I'll never buy it from you, and you'll go out of business. But it's when these misperceptions become dangerously inflated and separated from reality that you have the bubble economics that lead to collapses. And that's what we're looking at right now.
And Obamacare, and I'm circling back around, to your point, back in October, you said it's going to kill the economy. It's just one of the things. It's just going to absolutely drive it into the dirt, and we're going to bankrupt. And then paraphrasing what you said, that, when you have a problem with the economy, you don't take on more debt and bankrupt the economy. That's what you said back in October of 2012. And has your views changed? And number one, and secondly, what's the end game? So he's flipped. He said back in last month, I've never seen the Federal Reserve this disheveled and this disorganized and this crazy. Last month he was talking about tapering, slowing down the money printing. That next week all the Fed governors and presidents come out. This is last month. And, oh no, you got that wrong. The last week he comes out and says, yeah, we're gonna. It's the unemployment rate overstates the health of employment. We're going to keep the accommodation for the foreseeable future, including 0% interest rates. And even if it gets down to 6.5%, we're still going to print money. What's the end game here? And wrap that into Obamacare. Obamacare doesn't help any of that, then, does it?
No, Obamacare makes the situation worse. But the underlying problem that we have from a deficit and a federal sustainability issue resides entirely in health care. I've been writing about this now since the first debate about health reform began. And the stark truth is found in an article. It's finally being picked up in the press. Little organization called the Oklahoma Surgery Center, that you can go in and pay cash for surgical procedures, but they don't take Medicare, they don't take Medicaid, and if you can't pay, that's just too bad. The average cost is 1/5 of what the hospital would bill you at. Now, let's think about this critically for a moment. Medicare typically pays 80% of your hospital bill. The other 20% is your problem. All right, you have to cover it out of your pocket. All right, so if the cash price is 1/5 of the billed price, then what did you pay for with your Medicare premiums? And more to the point, what did you pay for with your private insurance premiums? The answer is nothing. You didn't pay anything, because when you get the bill, you still had to pay 20%. And if you pay cash, you'd pay the same 20%. So what we have done here is created an entire industry, the entire medical insurance and billing industry that exists today exists for no purpose other than to steal 80% of what you would otherwise put out there. All of your insurance premiums do not go to provide you medical care. Zero. And this is the underlying scam that is in so many different areas of our economy. Obamacare can't address this, because if it does, then all of those businesses that have been subsiding simply on grifting off money from you under the threat that, well, if you're uninsured, you're going to go bankrupt if something bad happens because you're going to get a $500,000 bill. But the problem is the bill should have been $50,000 or $25,000, and you could have paid that. Yeah, it would have been tough. You would have had to take out a big loan or mortgage your house or whatever, but you could have come up with it. $500,000? Not one person in 100 can come up with $500,000 in a short amount of time, right? It's impossible. So this is what they've done. They've essentially concocted a legal way to do what, if you were Guido and did this, we call it what it is, racketeering, and we throw your ass in jail. But this is now an embedded part of our economy and is 20% of gross domestic product. How do you take that out of the economy without having all of the edifices that were built upon this? Everybody's Mercedes that got it by doing this. How many Mercedes dealers go out of business if this goes away? A bunch. And so we have these kinds of distortions that have been built into the economy through the federal government's and the Federal Reserve's policies. And the Federal Reserve is the handmaiden of the Congress and the executive. Don't ever get the idea that this is just a bunch of bankers on Wall Street that are making this stuff up and screwing you. It's not. It's coming directly from the government that has put these programs in place. This is why we're in so much trouble. But you will not hear Bernanke talk about this. And yet analytically, if you look at it, it's right there under your face. And all you need to do is find things like the Oklahoma Surgical Center. There it is. There isn't any way to deny the arithmetic. You can't argue with math.
And Obamacare takes a bad problem and makes it uberly worse.
Well, Obamacare is an attempt to institutionalize what was being threatened with breaking down because cost had overrun value to the point that nobody could pay anymore. All right. And so what Obamacare does is say, well, if that happened, this edifice that we've had for the last 30 years has been building, it would collapse upon itself and all these people go out of business. Instead of that, we're going to take the guns that government possesses in the form of tax enforcement, in the form of other forms of enforcement that the government can bring to bear, because the government's the only one that has the ability to do this, okay? And shove those guns up your nose and say you will comply, or We're going to intercept your tax refunds. We're going to throw you in jail. We're going to, whatever the government does, we're going to prosecute, basically. So they've taken what was going to be a market response and attempted to short circuit it. In the end, it can't work because the money doesn't exist. So what are you going to do? Continue to destroy everyone's standard of living for the foreseeable future? Well, how long does that go on? The answer is at some point it ends. That this is just an attempt to prop up yet another failed system, just like subprime lending was.
And I got to get you the last question about the end game here. So Bernanke, and I've been running through this in my head. Man, the Federal Reserve looks totally disheveled. I mean, one month they come out, Bernanke says this. The following week, all the king's men, all the Fed governors and presidents, oh, no, that's not it. Then the next month he says, yeah, we're going to keep this going for a while. Well, next month he can't come back and say, we're going to taper now. Or 2 months from now he can't say, oh, well, wow, we're going to taper now. So this is it, right? I mean, we're going to print money. When does this blow up? I mean, it's going to be nirvana. It's going to be heroin for a while. The market's going to go up. The bonds are going to, When does this end? What's your end game scenario with all this money printing?
Bernanke's lost control of the bond market and, in general, of his policy. That's what you have learned over the last 3 or 4 weeks, is that he is no longer in charge. The market had a temper tantrum because he said, I was going to back off a little bit. Not I was going to stop. But
6 months from now.
And so, no, I didn't mean that. I'm not really going to do that. Okay, so now he's being yanked around by that price-value disconnect. The problem he's got is that the rest of the world isn't going to play by those rules, and the economy is going to do whatever it's going to do with or without him. So you have Europe, which is in the process of coming apart right now, all right? You have China, which is in the process of coming apart right now. And you have Japan, which is on the edge of possibly tipping into coming apart right now. And into the maw of all of this, you have a Fed chairman who says, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Reality be damned. All right? The reality is the Fed's not in charge. And when that confidence level breaks, you're going to see all hell break loose. And it doesn't matter what he does. What Bernanke puts into the economy, currently in quantitative easing of $1 trillion a year, which is about a 6.5% increase in the credit money supply. If you were to look at that and you were to say, well, we should have 6.5% GDP growth just based on that alone, okay, without any real organic growth, we're actually growing at less than 2. So what this is telling me is that the economy is contracting at 4% plus per year right now, and then you take what's going on in Europe and add to it, and we are setting up for a collapse that is worse than 1929. And it is going to come sometime within the next couple of years. It could be as soon as the next couple of months, but it is going to happen, and there isn't anything that can be done to stop it at this point because nobody's going to put their foot on his neck and say, you must stop now.
That's a grim picture, my friend, a grim picture. If he stops now, we collapse immediately. If he keeps going, we still collapse into the future, a year or so. Is that right?
But Greg, what you have to understand is that the longer you keep doing this, the worse it gets because the law of exponents these are not suggestions. The arithmetic doesn't cotton to political views. It just is. When we did this back in 2007 and 2008, we had to accept approximately a 20% contraction in GDP. That was the reality of coming back into balance. Now, you could try to ameliorate that to some extent, so maybe be 15, okay? Because there is some technological innovation that takes place. We've approximately doubled that now.
Things have gotten much worse, and they're going to be bad. The next crash will be worse than the last. Is that right?
Yeah, and the more we try to screw around with this, the worse it is. And so, it is a question of when does somebody step to the forefront and tell this clown, this game, your thesis on the Depression is wrong. It's mathematically provable that it's wrong. Not only that, it's empirically provable that it's wrong. Japan's been trying to run your game for 20 years and it hasn't worked. So, when does somebody have the courage to stand up and say, this stops now? And until you see that come out of Congress, we're not going to see success.
Carl Denninger. He's over at market-ticker.org. Thank you so much for coming on and taking us to school on Obamacare and the overall macroeconomy. Thank you very much, Carl Denninger.
Anytime. Thank you.